About 15 years ago, when I was still in career number one, about this time of year, I was in my first year of seminary, still working part-time as a developer, at that time a consultant for a big Toronto office building developer, and was building a building in London, Ontario, a retrofit of a downtown old Simpsons building, and we put a clock tower on the corner and built an atrium in the middle, and architects, engineers, contractors, and I was acting as the owner's representative at this point, awarding contracts for this $20 or so million job. And we had a meeting that morning between us, the owner came, and the contractor was there, and the architects and engineers were there, and we were going to start to award the bids for the different components of the construction project. And the one we were awarding that morning was a smaller one, about $1 million for an electrical quote. And so the contractor did what they should do. They got competing bids. They were kind of acting like a manager to us. They got 3 competing electrical bids, presented the bids to us, and said, we think we're ready to go with bidder number 1. We think he's good. His price is right. We think you should sign the contract right now. And they were kind of pushing my boss, George, to sign it right there. And I'm watching it. And I'm a bit of a cynical, skeptical, gut feel kind of guy, and I thought, there's something here, right? So I leaned over to George and whispered, I said, let's just wait for a week. We don't need to do it this week. Next week, we won't wreck the schedule. And George said, let's just wait for a week. And we went away, and I took the bids with me, and I took a roll of electrical drawings back home to Mississauga, Oakville, where I lived, and phoned up an electrical contractor friend of mine and said, hey, can you look at these drawings and give me a number on it? And so he priced it up, and 3 days later came with a number that was about $250,000 less than the $980,000 bid that we were being asked to sign. And I said, are you sure of this? Check it again. He checked it again, and he says, yeah, these guys are taking you to the cleaners. There's not that much electrical work in this project. So then I phoned up the other 2 bidders from London and said, hey, you guys bid this job. Is your number a good number? And the one guy that I got a hold of, who happened to also be a member of the Christian Reformed Church in London, so he couldn't lie to me, told him I was in seminary now. And he said, yeah, we bid that like 18 months ago on some sketchy drawings, and it was just throwing a number, a dart into the wall kind of a bid. We never bid real drawings on that. And that was the letter they were showing us in the comparison of the bids, right? So I went back the next week to the meeting with George and the contractor, and I was just delighting in what was about to happen. And we started to talk, and then I told him the whole story about what had happened, and these competing bids aren't real, and your number is a joke, and we think you're stealing from the owner here. And then I sort of threw it to the owner to fire him and to let him go, and we'd get the architect to get us a new contract, and we'd do it. And so I looked over to the owner, George, and said, George, take it from here. And George said, so Paul, oops, these are real guys. So Paul, what are you going to do? And Paul says, he's scrambling. His face goes white. Everybody in the room is tense. And Paul goes, we'll drop this number by $250,000. So he drops it right there. And I'm going, yeah, try to scramble now, Paul. You're gone. You're history. You're going to be canned. Look over to George. And George says, all right, Paul, that's great. We'll deal with that. Let's proceed on to the next contract. And I'm sitting there thinking, I thought I was going to get a huge bonus for making this thing, and now George acts in the way he does, and my entire world, in terms of what's fair and right and true, got turned upside down. And even now, as I tell the story, I'm trembling, and I shake my head, like, what in the world was he doing? Essentially rewarding the guy by letting him stay on the job, and the electrical contractor who was in cahoots with him, for what? His chutzpah, his savviness on his feet, being able to quickly deal with this unfolding story of getting caught with his hand in the cookie jar, how he scrambled so deftly. I'd like a guy like that to be working for me. It just didn't make sense to me. And the feeling of that not making sense was exactly what I felt when I first read this parable of Jesus's from Luke 16 and tried to understand why in the world he would tell this kind of story to make his point. Jesus said to his disciples, there once was a rich man who had a manager. project manager in the original Greek. He got reports that the manager, I lied on that project part. He got reports that the manager had been taking advantage of his position, running up huge personal expenses. So he called him in and said, "What is this I hear about you? You're fired. And I want a complete audit of your books." The manager said to himself, "What am I going to do? I've lost my job as manager. I'm not strong enough for a laboring job, and I'm too proud to beg. I've got a plan. Here's what I'll do. And when I'm turned out onto the street, people will take me into their houses once I do this." And then he went at it. One after another, he called in the people who were in debt to his master, and he said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" He replied, 100 jugs of oil. And the manager said, "Here, take your bill, sit down here, quick now, write 50. To the next person he said, "And you, what do you owe?" And he answered, 100 sacks of wheat. And he said, "Take your bill and write in 80. Now, here's the surprise. The master praised the crooked manager. And why? Because he knew how to look after himself. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They are on constant alert, looking for angles and surviving by their wits. I want you to be smart in the same way," and then Jesus' caveat, "but for what is right, using every adversity to stimulate you to creative survival, to concentrate your attention on the bare essentials so you'll live, really live, and not complacently just get by on your good behavior, on your good Christian, I'm a good person behavior." It's a pretty wild story from the lips of Jesus. I mean, what was he thinking? Did he not realize that mothers with young, impressionable children and future generations would read this story and have to somehow explain it to them? Why would Jesus cite and almost lift up this unethical protagonist? I think Jesus is in part teaching us that good, godly things often show up in unseemly and uncharacteristic and sometimes unbelievable places and people.